and welcome back to the Faith and Culture Show. I'm Catherine Camp, your hostess for the show. And today we are doing something really exciting. As you know, I really do my best to get you introduced to many very interesting and highly educated people to educate ourselves about what's going on in the world so that we can have those conversations with our culture around us, conversations that count. Conversations with an eternal perspective. I hope that you remember and saw the episode with Carl Teichrib. I don't know, it was a few weeks ago. Is that right, Carl? Right?
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago. It kind of feels like forever, but it wasn't that long ago.
I know, but you've been very busy since then, and I feel really humbled to have Carl back on, really, because it takes up his time. He's busy. He's a huge researcher, if you remember from the last episode. If you didn't see it, please go back and look it up. Today, of course, is Earth Day, and we're going to talk about what that means. And this is kind of like you told me, Carl, this is like a high holy day for pagans, right? So
Right.
I'm very excited to hear what you have to say. As you know, I think the way I reached out to you was because I was doing a lot of research on paganism and trying to get enough information to write my own book. Nothing compared to the research you do. Look at behind you is just so impressive, especially for someone who loves primary sources like me. Anyhow, I'm going to let you do a lot of the talking, but you can start wherever you want. Maybe introduce what all this Earth Day is about. Carl just came back. He and his wife and a small group of like-minded individuals went to a pagan conference, which is a big one, right? So tell us about that. A lot of Christians don't even know that goes on.
Right.
So get out your notepads, everybody, because this is going to be real interesting.
Well, first of all, I'll just give a bit of a background to the work that I do, because you may have a few new listeners. If they haven't heard of what I do, I would also suggest they go back and listen to our previous conversation. But
Carl, I need to
yes.
stop you. Can you raise your volume a little bit
Oh,
somehow?
sure. I'll do my best. I'll see how that goes.
I want people to hear.
Not a problem. Is that any better?
A little.
A little? Okay, hang on. Let me see if there's another setting here.
Because while y'all are listening to this, I don't want it to be that you can't hear what he has to say. Then my voice is going to be super, super loud to you. So let's wait for him to get back on. Anyway, yeah, Carl wrote Game of Gods. Let me put that up while he's fixing his volume. He wrote Game of Gods quite a while back. And so we're going to do a little bit of talking about that again, if you have not gotten it by now. But it is quite an impressive book. And what a lot of it talks about is what's been going on behind the scenes. And I'm talking about your book, and so people can get an idea if they haven't purchased it yet, what's going on behind the scenes and the nefarious activity that we really need to watch out for, as not only as American citizens, as Christians. This is real important stuff. This goes right into the book of Revelation, and it's happening in real life, and it's happening to not just us in the United States, but all over the world. You have people planning and scheming. So hopefully, I want you to hear everything that Carl has to say. Don't miss a thing. Go ahead and say something.
I'm sorry. I realize it cut me out. Does this sound any better?
A little. Maybe I should talk lower.
No problem. No, maybe what I'll do is I'll raise this even closer. Hopefully something will connect better. I'm not sure why it's acting the way it is. Technology, right? Yay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so I've been engaged as a researcher on global transformation since the 1990s, trying to understand it from, of course, a Christian worldview, and attending various events along the way, from United Nations events to, as you had suggested earlier, we had just come back only a few weeks ago from a large pagan gathering, roughly 1,000 witches, Wiccans, Druids, and other neo-pagans at an event called Paganicon in the Twin Cities in the Minneapolis region. And there's a substantial pagan community in Minneapolis, in St. Paul, and in the surrounding suburbs. And so they have an annual event where, like I said, roughly 1,000 witches attend to do lectures and workshops, to engage in rituals, a lot of networking. And some of the most prominent witches of the United States and abroad will come to that event, and others. This is not the only one. There are many other pagan gatherings in the U.S. and of course in Canada and other parts of the world. But in the U.S., there's a substantial number. In fact, in 2020, I was at the last Pantheacon, which was the largest indoor conference of pagans in the U.S. So there's a growing interest in paganism, but we have to ask, what is it? Like, what essentially is it from a biblical point of view?
And are you saying Pantheacon, like the Pantheon?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So the event I attended was Paganicon, and the other one I attended a few years ago was Pantheacon. And
Iganicon. I'm sorry. I just want to get these terms correct. How
right,
do you spell that?
pagan, Pagan, ICON,
Oh,
as in the conference or the convention of pagans.
Paganicon.
Correct.
Okay.
In fact, Paganicon is considered to be the event for a district or a zone that they affectionately called Paganistan. And that's a term that the pagan community in the Twin Cities area uses to describe their own district, their own region, because they have enough of a pagan presence that they consider it their homeland. So they call it, like you would call Afghanistan or Pakistan, they call it Paganistan.
Where is that?
Paganistan, that would be the Minneapolis, St. Paul, the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and the surrounding cities out to probably include all the way out to St. Cloud on the to the west of the city, and then probably as far north as Duluth. And I would think it would extend into Wisconsin and even into northern Iowa. But there's a
Okay.
region there. There's a large region, especially on the Wisconsin side, where there are a lot of Wiccans and witches, a lot of
Okay.
covens, a lot of circles. And so they affectionately call that part of the U.S. Paganistan.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So,
Didn't mean to diverge your attention.
no, that's all. It's all good. It's all good. So, we go to these events to try to understand what's happening, what are the changes, how is the pagan community transitioning, how are they adapting to the different political, social, and religious environments of our day. How do we as Christians now interact with these people? And we do. I mean, we're there to offer a Christian witness, but to do it in a way that's respectful to them. We're not, holding up placards, marching around. We're trying to have one-on-one conversations.
Okay.
Because that makes more of a difference than rushing in there and being loud and being maybe just disrespectful. We wouldn't want them to do that in our church.
That's
And
right.
we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that to their church, but we're going to come and we're going to have those one-on-one conversations and bringing up even the contrast between Christianity and their pagan beliefs. So paganism at its core is the worship of nature. That is how they describe it themselves, that this is a worship or a veneration, a high degree of spiritual connection into nature, where nature becomes the dominant, the primary point of existence, the primary reason or purpose It's what gives them meaning. And so in the pagan world, the gods and the goddesses that they worship are in many respects just they would call it maybe the divine reflection of the natural world. There's these, if you would take a look at the gods and goddesses of ancient Rome and Greece and even Egypt, they always had a connection into some natural process. Fertility, agriculture, wine, war, victory, sex, all of these natural elements would coalesce inside the realm of the gods and goddesses. And so in the pagan mindset, the gods and goddesses, these entities, we would recognize them as fallen angels.
Mm-hmm.
These entities represent some major element of nature itself. Hence, when they're worshiping the gods and goddesses, whatever these deities are, in their mind, in their worldview, they are worshiping some element that has a connection deeply rooted into nature itself. And so as you're interacting with them, you're like, well, what's paganism about? This is something I've been told a number of times where they will say, we are a religion or a spiritual movement that venerates or worships nature. Nature is the primary point, which of course, from a Christian point of view, that's Romans chapter 1,
Yes.
where we worship and serve creation rather than the creator.
Yes.
Where now the veneration of nature is what's paramount. It's what's actually the most important thing. And of course, that's idolatry in its purest sense, because it's taking it's taking the acknowledgement and recognition away from God as creator and putting the divine on us, on flowers and animals and trees and the natural world.
Yes.
And that of course that's the big no-no. Why would we want to engage in divine identity theft and steal God's glory in essence and place that mantle on the natural world? It blurs the line between the creation creator distinction. So when we think of paganism, whether it's the Wiccans, and I would call that large P paganisms because they're self-defined,
Okay.
or a small p pagan, which is the worldview that for the most part everybody's accepted, which is a sense of, oh, we have to save Mother Earth.
Yeah.
We have to engage in protecting Gaia. The climate change cult, and I'm calling it a cult because it is in essence a worship of Earth. It is a worship of the natural process. So all of that said,
okay, I'm going to interject here because in your book, The Game of Gods, you talk about this organization, the what is it called? I'm sorry, it's not something I'm very familiar with. The federal state or federal or federation. What is it?
The World Federalist Movement.
There you go. The World Federalist Movement. Thank you. I actually used it in a talk a month ago, and I just couldn't remember right now. I had a brain cramp. But you said that their most pressing issues were population control, the environmental sustainability, and of course, terrorism defined by them, I'm sure. And so we have in there that environmental control. And we know from footage from, I think it was Eisenhower? No, it was Johnson, who said that whoever controls the weather will control the world, I guess because then you can control crops. And so, and correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, you're the expert here, but this all plays into this one world government that they are trying to bring about, which it says in the book of Revelation, that is going to happen eventually. So,
right.
So we do have a cult here, but But I think a lot of people have fallen into it without realizing exactly what they're doing.
Right. So with the World Federalist Movement, their primary goal is world government. And they look at issues such as the environment, security issues. They look at reforming the United Nations. They've been at the forefront of trying to bring world government into play for, well, decades, going all the way back
Mhm.
to the 1940s. But they definitely see that the environment is one of those ways that you bring about global governance, global management. Because honestly, isn't that what government is about? Management.
Mhm.
It's always about management. Your policies are managerial policies. So there's always been this thrust to manage the world in somebody's image, whether it's the Club of Rome, the Trilateral Commission. In many respects, they're all pushing for the same goal, the same agenda of one world, an international worldview. Some just focus more extensively in certain areas. But we're on the topic of Earth Day. This is April 22nd. And so
Right.
this absolutely fits into it. And it
Mhm.
fits in a number of ways. Number one, the idea of Earth Day it's not a new idea. The very first Earth Day is April 22nd, 1970. And in 1970, Gaylord Nelson, the Democrat senator from Wisconsin, he believed that America needed to reshape its values towards protecting the earth, conservation, but deeper than conversation, something more radical yet than just simply caretaking or stewarding our natural resources. There was something fundamentally deeper than that. And so, working up towards the very first Earth Day, April 22nd, 1970, which was billed as the first national environmental teach-in, and it was modeled after the anti-war demonstrations because, of course, that's the Vietnam era. In working towards that goal of having this Earth Day, they published the Environmental Handbook. Now, the Environmental Handbook, you can still pick it up. You can pick it up for peanuts online. I would definitely recommend you doing that. The Environmental Handbook was all about transforming our values, our beliefs, our ethics. And in fact, on page 25, I have it highlighted. It says this, and I'll read a few quotes from it. In fact, from verse, probably from chapter 24, I said verse, it's almost like a Bible. And in a weird way, it kind of acted like that. This became kind of like the text that they all ran to. So I'll read from page 24, 25, and a little excerpt out of page 26. What we do about ecology depends on our ideas of the man-nature relationship. More science and more technology are not going to get us out of the present ecological crisis until we find a new religion or rethink our old one. Well, stop right there. I mean, which religion now do we have to replace? You know, um, what are we talking about here? To find a new religion or rethink our old one? Page 25. Hence, we should continue to have a worsening ecological crisis until we reject the Christian axiom that nature has no reason for existence save to serve man. So at this point now, Christianity is being put in the crosshairs. There's a charge against Christianity, and in fact, the first chapter of the Environmental Handbook makes it very clear that we as Christians are the problem. We're to blame. And then,
Interesting.
yeah, and then on page 26, both our present science and our present technology are so tinctured with orthodox Christian arrogance towards nature that no solution for our ecological crisis can be expected from them alone. Since the roots of our trouble are so largely religious, the remedy must also be essentially religious. It goes on to say we must rethink and refeel our nature and destiny. Well, the title of that essay, which was published by Lynn White Jr., um, let me just get the full title of the actual essay itself. It was a famous essay reprinted in the Environmental Handbook. And it was on, let me just grab the chapter here, the historical roots of our ecological crisis. So Christianity was to blame. That was quite evident. In fact, towards the very last part of the book, page 331, it gives you a list of acceptable religions to displace Christianity, including Gnosticism, hip Marxists, Teilhard Catholics, Druids, Taoists. It just goes on, and it describes that all primitive cultures, all ashram movements, uh, these are what is desirable. This is winning the ecological war, not by economics, but by seizing in their mind the key, and they describe it this way: the key images, the key symbols. In other words, the key worldview, the key understanding of how we're to frame our ethics, our morality, our value systems, and with it, of course, our behaviors along with our beliefs. And the Environmental Handbook was very clear that that had to change, and Christianity was definitely in the crosshairs to that end.
I find this very interesting because it's as if Christianity is always the problem, or Judaism.
Right.
And so these are the religions with the one true God, and they always seem to be the problem. In Marxism, any socialism, you can't have God in the way. So and now we have this big push for environmentalism, which we know. I feel like this is just a ploy to get control, just like the other things that they do, of the population of the world, really.
Right.
So,
And
mhm.
to that end, the Environmental Handbook is very clear that population is the problem.
Mm.
Population, the problem of breeding, as they describe it, has to change. So this is gonna be crazy, and I'm gonna have to hold this up. Just if people want to all of a sudden screenshot it and look at it, they also have it. I also have it in my essay on Earth Day that I put on my Substack.
Yes.
So regarding population, how do you deal with population? Because we're still going to have families, we're still going to have some kind of family structure. They're very clear that what we need to do is we need to lower childbearing. In fact, here's some example or some ideas: remove income tax deductions for more than 2 children above a specified income level, and scale it so that lower income families are forced to be careful, or pay families to limit their numbers. And then, my goodness, explore other social structures and marriage forms, such as group marriage and polyandrous marriage, which provide family life but may produce less children. Share the pleasure of raising children widely so that all need not directly reproduce to enter into this basic human experience. We must hope that no one woman would give birth to more than one child. So yeah, that's pretty crazy.
That
Here's
is,
here's yeah, here's the point though. This was handed out to high schoolers, colleges, and universities across the United States on April the 22nd, 1970. 20 million Americans participated in that first Earth Day. The bulk of
wow.
that being from schools, colleges, and universities. In fact, this copy I'm holding in my hand, which is quite tattered, this copy was the one used in my public school, in my high school, out in the middle of nowhere, Manitoba, Canada. Um, if you were in college or high school in 1970, odds are pretty high that this would have come across your desk at some point in time.
Wow.
So yeah.
Okay, you are the researcher of researchers, and I'm wondering, do you think that this mindset is behind the huge militant push for the acceptance of sexual diversity and those
Oh,
lifestyles?
I totally see it. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, the environmental handbook makes it very, very clear that we have to change our sexual habits, moving away from childbirth, including that idea of polyandrous marriage. Now, when I read that quote, most people might not know what polyandrous marriage is. You
Mm-hmm.
would know. You probably know what polygamy is.
Mm-hmm.
One husband married to multiple women.
Mm-hmm.
Polyandry, in this sense, is the opposite. One woman married to multiple men. So
Okay. Wow.
that's what was being pushed in the environmental handbook for college and high school students in 1970. Ha! There's no, it's no surprise to me that the Green Revolution walks hand in hand with the sexual social revolution. But of course it does. Romans chapter 1 makes that very clear that when we serve and worship the creation rather than the creator, God allows us to live by the things that by the desires that we want. In fact, he describes it as being given over to a debased mind.
A
In other
debased.
words, right. In other words, and that will include, and the Bible is very clear, same sex. So as we
Yeah.
worship and serve creation, God says, all right, I'm going to let you do what you want to do. In fact, that's in essence part of your curse.
Mm-hmm.
You want to worship nature and not me. I will give you over to what you desire, and you're going to see breakdown, social breakdown, family
Mm-hmm.
breakdown, sexual morality breakdown. It's going to happen.
And
Hello,
mental. It
right,
affects mental breakdown too. That most people are very prone to substance abuse who live that way because they know this is not natural. And that's
right,
because God's image is imprinted on all of us. And I was thinking before the show how far back this goes, because the first God, little g, that began to be worshipped was on, like, of the environment, the wind, and so these gods started to develop, became Baal, and then went into many different gods from there. And we all know, like you said, these these are not real. They're in a person's mind, and they are given to people, I think, in their imagination by fallen angels. And
right.
they put these things in our head if we allow them to. And so people do see them as some sort of entity that's really there. And they start, so really you're worshiping demons. If you start
Right.
doing this, you are entering the realm of worshiping demons for
You
real.
would call, yeah, yeah. You would describe it from a biblical point of view as the doctrines of demons.
Mm-hmm.
Literally a demonic level philosophy or a demonic worldview. Um, this is interesting because, okay, the environmental movement in its modern sense, and it's really a fairly new movement. It's only been around since realistically the 1960s. There was a Germanic environmental movement. The Nazis had their own ecological worldview. And if you go back, Lenin himself had a type of environmentalism that he was promoting. But where you really see it entering into North America's landscape or worldview is right around the 1960s,
Okay.
mid 60s, early 60s, mid 60s. Rachel Carson's book, The Silent Spring, which I think came out in 1962, kind of set it off. But already by the time the late 60s comes into play, there's a movement towards ecology as a global issue, a global concern. Um, in fact, the very first, you would call it the very first United Nations summit that dealt on ecology was in 1972. And it was the Stockholm Conference on Human Ecology, taking a look at how man and nature could work together. And Maurice Strong from Manitoba, Canada, who was the architect behind really Agenda 21 and the Rio Conference in 1992, he also was the Secretary General for the 72 Stockholm Conference. And for the 72 conference, so of course, in 1970, we have the very first Earth Day. It kind of sets it in the public's mind. And then at the international level, you have in 1972, 2 years later, the Stockholm Conference, including their unofficial report, Only One Earth, which was which was written on behalf of the United Nations Conference on Human Ecology. But the report makes it very clear. Again, no one nation, not even groups of nations, can, acting separately, avoid the tragedy of increasing divisions between wealthy North and poverty-stricken South in our planet. And it goes on to talk about how what we need is a progressive income tax. We need policies for education, for shelter, and all of this is to work towards our environmental interdependence, and that we have to have a sense of a global community. In fact, we need to have what they described as a total system, a domesticated society, as we look to see the world as only one, and that all of mankind needed to come together to save the planet. And so all of a sudden, in the early 1970s, the environmental movement is being set up to literally be the talking point for global policies, for global politics.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still living with that today.
Yeah, we are. And the thing is people don't, not everybody starts to think, okay, who is setting this policy, and where are they? And do they know anything about your culture? It's not going to be, many people in the United States always figure it's everyone lives like we do, with free speech, liberties, the Second Amendment, so we can protect our First Amendment. They think everyone lives that way, and that somehow we're wrong, and but it's not going to happen that way. We're looking at somebody setting up an entire global governance that may not even ever understand our Constitution. They don't want Christianity. Our entire Constitution and our Declaration of Independence in the United States, I know you're in Canada, but everything is based on a Christian worldview. Well, you do away with that, you have nothing. You have a totalitarian type tyrannical rule. And so right. We need to be really careful here, these ideas that we accept. And when you're saying this one earth, do you remember those commercials, the Coca-Cola commercials? I'd like to see the world, everyone's holding hands, they're all a bunch of hippies with flowers around their hair. I was really little, but I remember seeing that thinking, oh, how nice, world peace. Well, yeah, we all want that. Just
right.
The way you get it is, be careful.
Right. And this is the irony. One of the main ironies of what you just described is there are so many Americans who have led the way. So when you're taking a look at global governance, when you take a look at the United Nations, in many respects, it was an American constructed framework. Mm. You had Rockefeller money that was used to advance the idea of the United Nations. FDR, you had my goodness, there's a reason that the UN landed in New York City, and it was, in many respects, it was a fulcrum of power used by all kinds of nations, but the United States was part of that. And so it was, in many ways, a United Nations constructed house for the world. And while you have on one side Americans saying, we're going to stand for our Constitution, we stand for liberty, we stand for national independence, in the same breath, you have major, powerful Americans who have been going, and I could think of even just, let's say, household names like Al Gore, who's like, oh, we need global climate governance.
Oh.
Like, hello, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. So we have a mindset with our international leaders who happen to be nothing more than national leaders with this bigger vision, this bigger agenda on the plate. So in Canada, my goodness, I am now roughly 1 week away, a little bit less than 1 week away from our national federal election. And Mark Carney is poised to become our next prime minister. He right now is sitting and acting as a prime minister, and he is Mr. Climate Change.
Yeah.
He's made that very clear. It's part of his banking and financial institutional worldview. That's how he's connected himself in. So there's a reason he became, from being the governor of the Bank of England. First, he was the governor of Bank of Canada. Then he moved on to become the governor or one of the board of directors for the Bank for International Settlements, and then the Financial Stability Board. And then he moved on to become the governor of the Bank of England. And then he became the envoy for climate change at the United Nations for the Glasgow Climate Summit, which happened, I think, 2 years ago. And so he's been always advocating we need carbon taxes and we need to fight climate change. And just a couple of weeks ago, he basically took our carbon taxes and he's shelved it temporarily. He hasn't abolished it. He's
Because
just
he wants to win or have a chance of
right,
winning. It's a trick.
right, exactly. But
It's a trick.
he's living out this and this at an international level and then causing it to become domestic, national, local policies. And
Oh,
I mean, I was really glad when he not abolished, pardon me, he shelved the carbon tax for a short time. I was glad about that because it radically, drastically dropped the price of our gasoline at the pump. But it ticked me off every time I would go to fill up my tank. I have to pay a carbon tax whether I want to or not, and I know
mm-hmm.
the worldview. I know the worldview behind it. I know the policy behind it. I
Yeah.
know the thinking behind it. And for goodness sakes, it's really nothing more than a tithe or an offering to Gaia,
To
just
GAIA.
politicized. Yeah, just politicized. So
Mm,
this has landed so deep in our culture, in your country, in my country. I
yes.
mean, my goodness, I look at England, the policies that have hit hard from land use, land zoning. Um, it's been incredible that what's come out of these UN events, and of course, Agenda 21 being one of those examples. So I'm holding up Agenda 21. This is not a book about Agenda 21. This is Agenda 21. And again, it's management, management, management all the way through.
Globalism,
Uh,
globalism, globalism. And
right.
this guy, I heard that that guy who you just talked about, he was placed there. And
Yes.
it's almost like you got rid of one little tyrant and now you have a bigger tyrant.
Right. So I'm really hoping in the next week we see a complete change of course. Really, really hoping that that's the case.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So these ideas, we will look at them as okay. This is just the realm of of thought, philosophy, ideas. No, it ends up landing squarely in the world of policy and action and social change. Hello, the world has changed radically since Earth Day 1970, and I
Mm,
would I would argue a big part of the change came not primarily, but a big part of it came because this became firmly ingrained in the culture of our schools,
mm-hmm.
and then in the realm of politics, and then it landed even inside of our churches.
Well, what happened, Carl, is that they introduced it, like you said, it was middle school or was it high school and college?
This was primarily towards high school and college, but I do know
Okay.
middle schools. I do know that middle schools took part in it as well. And again,
So it's
20 million American kids.
yeah. So as soon as here they are going through school, they are being given this book as it's something that we all need to do, and it's always for the greater good. It's always
Right.
for the the community. You have to give up your freedoms. Well, who are you? Are the people at the top giving anything up? No, they're not. And so I'm just thinking, of course, by now, think of all the people who have gotten married since then, who went through school. It is completely entrenched in our psyche,
Yep.
our way of thinking now, because of when they started. And And here we are, what, 40 years later?
Yeah, 50
40
plus.
or
Yeah,
50 years.
yeah,
Yeah.
50 plus.
And so, of course, you've got people grown up having grandkids, and now they're teachers. They are the teachers now in the schools. They're the ones retiring. So they've taught another generation, and now those
Right,
people are teachers. So,
right.
oof,
Yeah, so to give a
okay.
sense of the idea of internationalism that the Environmental Handbook even worked at, I mean, it's one thing to look at Agenda 21, to look at the Only One Earth document that was part of the 1972 Stockholm Conference, but this comes from the Environmental Handbook, again, written to students. Looking beyond our borders, our students will be encouraged to ask even harder questions. Are nation states actually feasible now that they have the power to destroy each other in a single afternoon? Can we agree on something else to take their place before the balance of terror becomes unstable? What price would most people be willing to pay for a more durable kind of human organization? More taxes? Giving up national flags? Perhaps the sacrifice of some of our hard won liberties.
Wow.
Hello. Wow.
Yeah.
Yep. Maybe our nation states aren't ever, they're not viable now. Now that we have the ability to destroy ourselves in nuclear war, to destroy the environment, maybe we need some other human organization. Huh. Maybe we'll have to pay more taxes. Maybe give up your flag. Maybe give up your liberties. But look at the benefit that's going to come out of this. We're going to be one world.
And
No,
then
thank
and
you.
then once they get you hooked on that, you won't have any liberties anymore. You
Right.
become their slaves. And then when you learn that none of this is real, there really isn't. That the people clamoring at the top, or start causing all of this, are the ones ruining our environment in the first place. I follow, I don't know if you've heard of him, Dane Wigington with Geoengineering
No,
Watch, but
no.
he has made it his life to do research on these
Mm.
chemtrails and what's in them, and the airplanes, and who they get to spray this stuff. He and in his documentary Dimming, he mentions that it only takes 14 airplanes to spray the entire globe to
Mm.
cause this, what they call dimming the sun. So we're
I
not,
have,
and
yeah,
okay,
I have heard of dimming. So okay, yep,
yeah.
yep. Maybe
So we're
that rings
not,
a bell.
even if,
It does ring a bell. Yeah,
yeah, so if you have solar panels, they're not going to work. I mean, people are trying so hard to do everything that they can because they believe a lot. Well, they're not working as well as they should, as they're designed to, because these crazy psychopaths like Bill Gates are paying to dim the sun. And that's why growth, plant growth, and then these chemicals fall on our soil, on our plants, on our animals, on, we breathe them in. It's a mess. They're the ones depleting the ozone. And so it's frustrating. But okay, you just made me think of all of this.
well, from my perspective, I think when it comes to action items, let's say by what multinational groups are maybe doing, I understand why they do what they do. I mean, this is a push for power, an issue of control.
Mm-hmm.
What angers me, truly angers me, on a completely different level, is how the church community, the Christian community, has bought into some of this thinking. Like, so I'm holding here in my hand a book called Earth Trek. Earth Trek was published by the Mennonite Central Committee. It was commissioned by the Mennonite Central Committee, which is, I mean, you would think of the Mennonite community as being a fairly conservative um, Christian group. But I'm just going to find one of the prayer suggestions that they have. Here we go. So, in a weird way, this is the Mennonite Central Committee's version, in a sense, of the Environmental Handbook. They have the whole book laid out in chapters that parallel the days of creation. And so, with that, they have points of meditation, action plans, things that you can do, um, even little suggestions that maybe you want to engage in terms of study groups. Here's one of the meditations, and I'm sorry, this fits in that Romans 1 category. Let's call it for what it is. This is a pagan prayer. We are the earth through the plants and animals that nourish us. We are the rains and the oceans that flow through our veins. We are the breath of the forests of the land and the plants of the sea. We are human animals related to all other life as descendants of the firstborn cell. We share with these kin a common history written in our genes. We share a common present filled with uncertainty, and we share a common future as yet untold. Oh, garbage. Like, hello, no,
Wow.
uh, quit with this, you know? Here's another one. This is a meditation in the Mennonite Central Committee's book, and this is a meditation from Black Elk. Um, we should understand well that all things are the works of the Great Spirit. We know that He is within all things, the trees, the grasses, the rivers, the mountains, and all the four-legged animals and the winged people. So at the end of it, you've got whole sections of. By the way, you have whole sections on things like. Oh, I have to read this. Here's another meditation. Oh my! This is to our shame. Okay, I come from a Mennonite background. To our shame. We live by the sun, we feel by the moon, we move by the stars. We live in all things, and all things live in us. And it goes on like this. We live in all things live in us. We dedicate our practice to others. We include all forms of life. We celebrate the joy of living, dying. We depend on the earth, our minds open with wisdom and insight. We depend on trees and animals. Sorry, this is you've walked off the deep end.
Yeah,
But
this reminds me of an indigenous people around the world before they meet Christ.
yes,
Um,
yes,
you
yes,
recognize at creation that there's something bigger, and that's called it's general,
Jen. Yep,
revelation. And I always tell
yes,
my students, God wrote two Bibles. One is general, one is special, revelation. And
yep,
just creation, the created order, you see there's something really special. So that's what it reminds me of, is just indigenous groups before they meet Christ and
right,
understand.
right. It has that element of we will worship and venerate nature because that's all we know. But in the Western world, actually the whole world, pretty much, we should know better. We should
Yeah.
know that there is a creator God who is separate, distinct, that He is
Yeah.
exalted, holy, and that He is therefore different than creation. So
Now you
just to,
realize, sorry, Carl.
oh, that's
I
okay.
was
That's good.
When you said about religion and you're saying that this is from the Mennonites, you realize that there is a green letter Bible uh,
Yes.
written. Yeah, yeah. I've got the hardback. Is that the hardback?
Awesome.
That's a soft one.
This is the soft one. Yes.
I've got the in seminary for my MDiv. I went to a rather liberal seminary, which was good because I learned all the loopholes. Because I was like, no, that's not. I can tell you right here. This is why that that crushes that argument. But yeah, and it was. I think it comes out of Duke University. I don't know if you know where it comes out of, but yeah.
No.
So
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? I mean,
yeah.
that's what we've become. Um,
Yes.
we have become pagan in the churches,
Yes.
where we have taken and done the exact opposite of what Romans 1 tells us to do, which is to worship God as creator. And so we bent our knee to the creation. Just to give you an illustration of that. So again, from the Mennonite Central Committee's book, Earth Trek, and they have these action items at the very back of each chapter. In fact, I'm going to hold my hand over it so you can't see it until I let it go. There you go. I've highlighted it in yellow, but it is emboldened in the original. And it says this week, make an offering to the earth in the form of a prayer or some other gift. Are you kidding me? Like, hello,
Pray, bail. Yeah. Next thing, they're going to
unbelievable.
be giving their first child to to the
Yeah,
earth. Oh
like
boy.
hello. So when we think about something as radical as the very first Earth Day, the environmental teach-in in 1970, and the crazy ideas that that was propagating, and then we take and we look at how it moved from there into our environmental political discourse with the very first Earth Summit back in 1972, then the 1992 Rio Earth Summit that gave us Agenda 21, gave us, of course, I have it right here, the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is a really small document that got interpreted into this big,
Oh my God.
huge
Let me put
sucker.
the
No, this is crazy, totally crazy. So the Convention on Biological Diversity, if it was laid out on letter-sized paper, is roughly 18 pages long. That's it, 18 pages. Its first interpretation is this massive volume, the Global Biodiversity Assessment. Huge volume, over 1,000 pages. But they weren't done. In fact, they make mention of the fact that they're missing a couple of key components, culture and spirituality. So a little while later, they came up with a cultural and spiritual interpretation of the conventional biological diversity. Guess what? Christianity is anathema. It is the wrong religion. That is the essence of what it is saying. And it gives pages and pages and pages of examples of sociological discussions, anthropological discussions on why indigenous and pagan spirituality is what will lead the way forward as we have an enlightened era of worshiping and serving the planet. They, of course, will call it worshiping and serving the planet, but in reality, that's what it is. In fact, I'll hold it up. It's a big book. They've got a section, a box section called All That is a Web of Being. We belong to the webs of being, to Earth, to Gaia. And it goes on to talk about we belong to and are inseparable from our culture, from one another, from Gaia. We are interdependent with all that is. And it continues on, we belong to, are responsible for the webs of being, the universe, Earth, Gaia. And towards the back of this long poem, cultures built on values other than belonging are doomed to self-destruct. A culture built on domination of the earth and all the animals therein. Of course, here we're talking about the Judeo-Christian worldview. A culture built on domination of the earth and all the animals therein is doomed to disappear. A culture based on self-interest is doomed to disintegrate. A culture based on survival of the fittest will not survive. A culture built on competition will destroy itself. So that's what this was marketing. So we moved from this realm of an 18 page document to something much, much larger.
wow. I think that says a lot. And they basically have expanded on that very first book from the very first Earth Day in 1970. And it is a religion in and of itself.
Right.
And here we are, 2025. We're doing this on Earth Day. And yes, Gaia is a pagan goddess. And
Yeah.
that's exactly what is happening. And you have millions that have bought into it. And as we know, in Hinduism, they do see, it's pantheism, and everything is sacred. And it's interesting because, yes, God created everything that we see, but it's not God. A tree is not God. It's
Right.
not more important than a human life. We are charged with taking care of the earth. And I'm so glad that we're doing this. I loved your idea to have this conversation today, because I think we can get lost in the weeds and get carried away And we do have Christians where we are charged with caring for the earth, yes, but not at the expense of humanity. And that's where the globalists have taken this with a carbon tax. Pretty soon it's going to be you can't breathe because and we have to cut back on human life because they breathe too much and they take up a lot of carbon. And I last year or 2 years ago, I heard Bill Gates wanted to cut down trees and bury them so that they wouldn't emit anything. Wow. And I was thinking, you are a true psychopath. I mean, why would you have somebody doing this? That's ruining our environment. You have all of these solar panels going up in farmland. I don't know if they're doing that in Canada, but they are in the United States. I don't know if you saw that while you were here for the pagan conference.
Yep, I did.
It's awful. And these massive windmills that don't produce anything. And it's the only people getting wealthy are the people that manufacture them. And then they're only good for 10 years. And then they have to go put them in a landfill somewhere and make more. No.
Yeah. So when we think about today, we think about Earth Day, we have to look at, okay, what does it mean then to actually be stewards of the environment? Is it to follow what the world says? Is it to follow the suggestions of this? Or, my goodness, to follow, the dictates of this? It's interesting because when we consider the ideas of what the world puts forward as, saving the earth, there's a tendency, especially with us as Christians, to go, well, we have to do better. In fact, that was one of the interesting reactions of the Christian community to the charges laid against Christianity by things like this, the Environmental Handbook. We all of a sudden went as Christians in the early 70s, oh, we're to blame? We're to blame? We never challenged their assumptions. To our shame. We never challenged their assumptions. A biblical understanding of stewarding God's creation is to recognize, first and foremost, it's His. He is the owner, the creator. He is distinct from it, but He has ownership, and He has given it over to us in a stewarding position. That doesn't mean now I'm going to run around and, pile trash in my neighbor's backyard. I'm going to look after my land. But I'll look after my land, not a committee, not not some bureaucrats in New York City or in Brussels or in Ottawa who don't understand how the land even operates. All they're working on are surveys or modeling, and the approach has to be different. It has to be different. The approach I'm seeing with what the globalists are presenting is A, you need to change your religion, and then B, you need to change your consumption and behavior patterns to align with our values. The guys at the top, because we're the ones who say it.
Yeah.
That's what I'm seeing. And as Christians, we should be going, stop. Your very first premise that this is a religious issue is correct, but you got it backwards. You've got it backwards. You are worshiping the creation and not the creator. Hey, as the Environmental Handbook says, right here, that we have to find a new religion or rethink our old one. Wow.
Yep. Well, that's what it's been all about. It's interesting because I just spoke with an individual who deals with the CCP and is fighting it, and it's the same thing. We can't have people believing in a higher power, much less Christianity. Right. Because you need the government to be God. You have to look to the government in order to set all the rules and regulations, and you must fall in line as a good little slave and don't question anything. And that's exact opposite. God invites questions. The creator of the universe wants us to seek him and ask all kinds of questions. and wait for his response. So, okay, if we can continue with this, and I was just thinking, you went to this big pagan conference, and what, how do they discuss Earth Day, or do they, or how do they, you know, get in people involved in this? And why do you think Wicca is growing so much to have over 1,000 witches there?
Well, okay, to the question on the Wiccan community and its connection to Earth Day.
Yes.
There was nothing that came out during this last Paganicon, at least in terms of the workshops I attended. Nothing that I saw or heard that connected them in to Earth Day. However, when I went to PantheaCon in 2020, because 2020 was the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, Selena Fox, who is a very well-known and very influential witch out of Wisconsin, I went to her workshop on Earth Day and celebrating 50 years of Earth Day, and she was very open about how the Wiccan community and herself specifically was very involved in the first Earth Day in 1970, and how they recognized its value and its spiritual importance from their perspective.
Okay.
And, I mean, she made sure that there was a direct connection between herself and, at that point, the growing Wiccan and witchcraft community and Earth Day. And I thought that was very telling. That was a very interesting admission. But it made sense. It made sense because it is, in essence, that new religion, that religion of nature, that religion of venerating creation. And so it only does make sense that there would be a connection. If it was just a worldview connection, that's one thing. But when she herself made it very clear that she was personally involved and very directly involved, I'm like, okay, well, that raises some interesting questions as to, all right, like I know that when Gaylord Nelson put the Environmental Earth Day together, the very first Earth Day together, he had a staff of especially young people that he brought on. Selena Fox wasn't part of that. I know that. I know she wasn't part of that at all. But I would like to know if maybe she was a part of her state level, operating Earth Day at the state level, because the office in Washington, D.C. that Gaylord Nelson put together, it created a national network, literally coast to coast across the U.S., with regional and statewide and city-based activists and advocacy groups promoting and pushing Earth Day. So to hear that from her own mouth, that she was directly involved, I thought that was very, very telling. And just how excited that they were in 2020. And I was there in February of 2020. I came home literally, I think, like 2 weeks before lockdown. And of course, everything changed after that all over again. But
Yeah.
to hear that from a prominent figure, a very prominent figure in the Wiccan community was quite revealing that there is this connection.
It's interesting how we look at it as this new religion, and that the way that the book put it, that you first introduced here, as something new, and when it's actually something very old. It's ancient Mesopotamian religion. It's worshiping those gods, or the idea of those gods rather than the real creator, and giving that importance, and not the real creator. And that's going down the wrong path completely. Are you ready to talk about how, as Christians, we can help people set this straight, how we can wake people up on this, or do you still have some more tidbits and goodies for us?
No, we could be here honestly all day. In fact, I have a large wall over there of environmental documents that we could pull from, including some of the preparatory documents that were laid out before the Rio summit took place in '92. Some really interesting stuff. But all that said, like I said, we could be here all day and go through all the nitty gritties. but all that said, we need to formulate a response. We need to actually have a response. But until we know that there's a problem, we're not going to be able to understand that we have to have a response to it.
Mhm.
And we have, for a lot of Christians, we have ignored the green movement, the environmental movement. For a lot of Christians, we haven't. A lot of Christians, we've been going, yeah, this is really concerning. But there's still a lot of folks who are kind of asleep at it, going, yeah, well, whatever, Earth Day. It's a good day for me to go and hang out with my kids and go pick up trash. And if that's what you're doing, well, fantastic. Kudos to you. I've done the same thing. Not necessarily on Earth Day, but going and picking up garbage and stuff. Do it because
Yeah.
it's just the right thing to do.
Well,
But
you
the
also,
moment, but the moment, yeah, but the moment we take and move from that to saying we are serving the earth, we
Hmm.
have that's where we've entered dangerous territory.
Well, we get Christians wrapped up in this to the point that they believe cows are dangerous for the environment. And they
I
believe,
know,
okay, everybody needs to eat bugs now. It's okay. They've got protein. People have been doing it for centuries. Um, they still do it in African countries, the African bush, and they get wrapped up in that. So they are the first ones to fold when these kind of pressures from the Davos group and come in and want to cut everything off. You mentioned a politician. You also have people like John Kerry who are like Goofy. It just reminds me of Goofy from the Disney, just tripping over himself, trying to get all of this environmental stuff, and like you said, Al Gore. It's absurd, but they want to rule the world based on fear that something is actually, it's impending doom for all of us. When, as we spoke about earlier, it's those same groups that are causing our environment to be caustic, not human beings, not cows, not your dog, not your horse.
right?
Um, so that's
Yep,
when I see Christians falling and folding into this deception, uh, because they're not educating themselves on, hey, this is a ploy to get control. And Christians will be the first ones they lob off
yep,
when they
yep,
get their way.
yep. Yeah, we represent the wrong worldview to them. We represent the danger point. When the reality of it is, the ideas that they're presenting, when they come to fruition, when they end up in the realm of policy, politics, uh, we enter really dangerous territory, really dangerous territory. So for us, we need to be able to distinguish the difference between what the world is saying and what the Bible is saying. We need to be able to recognize what the world is giving forward in terms of their solutions to the problems, realizing that those solutions are indeed, in many respects, more dangerous than the so-called problem to begin with. And at the forefront of all of this is the recognition that as Christians, we have freedom. Christ has set us free from the bondage of sin. Likewise, we also want to see people free from the bondage of even each other, like quit literally lording over each other. In fact, the reason I titled my book Game of Gods is because that's what we're doing. Literally, world leaders are playing games of gods. They believe that they can be God over us. And so, if you want to understand this more at a deeper level, from a variety of different angles, then definitely tackle Game of Gods. I also have a
Mm-hmm.
Substack article I released today. It's an older article. I freshened it up a bit, but it's on my Convergence Substack page. So look up my name, Carl Teichrib, or look up Convergence, Power and Belief. That is my new platform on Substack, and I'll be reposting piles of articles from previous publications that I have contributed to, and some new articles and new reports, and down the road maybe even a podcast. We'll see where it goes.
Awesome. That will be fascinating if you do that. I know it's a lot of work. Um,
Yeah,
that would be wonderful. Yeah, and I always go to, when all of this fear mongering starts to happen, I look at the book of Revelation and look, okay, God doesn't say this. He says this is going to happen, but it's going to be controlled by God, and not humans pretending and making things happen. Like the Wuhan virus, that was obviously man-made. It's going to happen, and no one will be able to stop it when it happens
Right.
from God.
Right.
So
That's
I
a different
always,
level.
yeah, I look at that and I think, no, that's not true. And because I trust what the Word of God says. Okay, so thank you, Carl.
Well, thank
This is,
you. Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you. This is an important conversation, especially for today.
yeah, we need to be careful who we are worshiping. And if everyone just does their part and rises up and starts educating people, you've got to read Carl's stuff. Go to his brand new Substack, get the book Game of Gods, and you'll understand who's behind this. There are puppeteers behind all of this, and they are patient, and they will wait generations, but they're going to chip away at the fabric of our society and all the Western cultures, because we have a way of creating wealth and the ability to survive. But when they start pulling those little things that we have in order to survival and start mandating things that will kill us, that's when the population gets reduced, which is their goal anyway. And we need to be careful. We need to tell people what's going on. So please read his information. You have no idea how well researched this man is. So I trust what you're putting out there. So
Thank you.
thanks for all your hard work, because it's not easy.
No, but I appreciate that. And thank you for allowing me to be on your platform and talking about the subject today.
And like you say, we could go on for hours, days, whatever, because there's so much out there. It's so rich. Thank you, and God bless you.
Okay. Bye-bye.